first thing I ever learned about the universe was that it had no place for us. That was not something said with cruelty. It was said the way a mechanic tells you a machine is broken beyond repair, plainly, without emotion, as if feelings were never part of the conversation to begin with. The galactic hegemony had scientists, lawyers, and forms. They had committees that met in tall buildings on distant worlds. And those committees, after reviewing documents we were never allowed to read, decided that the Discari were not worth the space we occupied. They called it a resource-adjacent sapient reclassification. We called it the end of everything we had ever known. I was 9 years old when our ships left Veth Sora for the last time. I remember standing with my mother in the cargo hold of a freighter that smelled of rust and old grain. She pressed all 4 of her hands against my face, and I felt it. The memory she was giving me. That is how our people work. We do not just tell each other things. We share the actual feeling of a moment, skin to skin, like passing a flame from one candle to another. She gave me the sunrise of Veth Sora. It was soft and green, the way mornings were there, with the light coming slowly over the long silver grass that grew near the coastal ridges. I could feel the cold of the morning air. I could feel the weight of it, the kind of beauty that only matters after it is gone. My mother did not say anything. She just held my face in her hands and made sure I would carry it with me forever, even if I never saw it again. We did not know then that we never would. 40 ships, 340,000 people. That was what remained of a civilization that had once spread across 17 worlds, written 10,000 years of history, and built libraries made entirely of shared memory. We flew into the dark between stars with damaged engines, too little food, and the knowledge that no one in the known galaxy was waiting for us. The hegemony had given us 3 choices, and all 3 of them were slow ends dressed in different clothes. So we chose instead to go where they told us no sane species would go, into the fringe, the wild and lawless edge of known space where the stars were young and the maps were mostly guesses. They told us nothing lived there worth mentioning. They were talking, of course, about the humans. I do not think the hegemony ever truly understood humans. They catalogued them, certainly. They had files on human biology, human history, human social structures. They knew that humans were short-lived and soft-bodied and laughably new to the stars. What the hegemony did not understand, what almost no one outside the fringe understood, was what humans actually did when they looked at a problem. They did not ask who was responsible for solving it. They just solved it. We were 6 days from total life support failure when our sensor operator picked up the ships. I remember the silence that fell across every Discari in range of the announcement. We had learned by then to be afraid of ships. Ships meant the hegemony. Ships meant forms and committees and polite, clinical words for terrible things. But these ships did not move like hegemony vessels. They were slow and asymmetrical, and clearly repaired many times over in ways that prioritized function over appearance. They looked, honestly, like they had been built by several different people who never spoke to each other, and somehow it had worked out fine. Later I would learn that this was, in fact, exactly what had happened. The transmission came through on an open channel. No encryption, no formal protocol, just a voice. A woman's voice, deep and calm, with the particular quality of someone who had seen many unexpected things and had decided, as a personal policy, not to be shocked by them. She said, "You look like you've had a bad week. We've got food and a dock. Come on in." That was it. No request for identification. No demand to state our purpose or our legal status under hegemony law. No questions at all, really. Just an observation and an invitation, delivered with the same casual warmth that I would later learn to recognize as entirely typical of Captain Bren Okafor, who ran colonial supply routes out of Calder's Reach and had, in her 63 years of life, developed a very simple personal philosophy. If someone needed help and you could give it, you gave it, and the paperwork could wait. I would spend years trying to understand that philosophy. I am still not sure I fully do, but I have seen what it builds and I know it is real. Calder's Reach was not a beautiful world, not in the way that Veth Sora had been beautiful. It was a large, wet, loud planet with 3 moons and weather patterns that changed every few hours, and soil so rich it seemed almost aggressive about growing things. The humans who lived there, about 2 million of them at the time, had the look of people who had learned to love a difficult place through the simple act of staying in it long enough. The colonial administrator who greeted us at the landing platform was a small old man named Haruki Mano, who wore a coat that was too large for him and carried a data tablet he kept forgetting to look at. He shook every hand offered to him, including all 4 of mine, without hesitation or curiosity about the number, as if 4 hands were not unusual at all. He showed us to the lowland shelf. It was a wide, dim region in the planet's southern basin where thick clouds gathered year-round and the light came through filtered and soft and manageable. The humans found it depressing. To us it was close to perfect. We are sensitive to bright light. Our eyes are built for low conditions, for the muted greens of Veth Sora's slow mornings. And this place, gray and cool and draped in mist, felt like something we could actually live in. "It's all yours if you want it," Haruki said, gesturing at several thousand square kilometers of empty, productive, rain-soaked land. One of our elders asked what we would owe in return. Haruki looked genuinely puzzled for a moment, as if the question had come from an unexpected direction. Then he said, "Well, if you figure out anything interesting about those soil deposits in the southern ridge, let us know. The geologists have been arguing about them for 30 years. That was, as far as I can tell, the entire negotiation. We built Velkarath in the first 2 years. Not quickly, not grandly, but with the particular care of people who were building something they intended to last. The Duskari are natural burrowers. Our bodies are compact and our limbs are strong, and we have always lived partly underground, preferring the constant temperature and soft darkness of good deep earth. We built downward as much as outward, and what appeared on the surface as a modest settlement was, below ground, a city of tunnels and chambers and long memory halls where our elders kept the shared records of everything we had been. The humans came to look, at first out of curiosity, and then out of something more like friendship. They brought food we had never tasted and asked questions that were almost always genuine. They did not treat us as curiosities or as guests on borrowed time. They treated us as neighbors, and we gave them what we had. Our memory sharing, which humans found both strange and wonderful, became something of a cultural exchange. A Duskari elder touching a human child's hand and sharing a clear impression of an underwater reef on Veth Sora. A human grandmother pressing her palm against a Duskari's arm and sending, imperfectly, in the loose and wordless way that humans manage it when they try, the feeling of her first snow. It was not perfect translation, but it was real. Priya Sanjukta was born 7 years after we arrived. She grew up in a household where a Duskari family lived 2 doors down, and memory sharing was as normal as sharing a meal. By the time she was 12, she was spending her afternoons in our community workshops, learning how our tools worked and explaining, with the intense patience of someone who has thought about a thing much longer than her years should allow, how human electronics could be adapted to work with our anatomy. At 16, she rebuilt my rifle. I had been part of the Colonial Defense Volunteer Unit for 3 years by then, something that had developed quietly and without fanfare as the hegemony's frontier maps began creeping in our direction. Priya came to the workshop one afternoon, looked at the standard-issue human weapon I had been struggling to operate with 4 hands designed for very different tasks, and said simply, "That's inefficient. Give it to me for a week." She gave it back 10 days later. It had 2 new grip configurations, a trigger assembly that could be operated by either my primary or secondary hands, and a targeting adjustment that accounted for the way Duskari eyes process distance slightly differently than human eyes do. It was, in every practical sense, a better weapon. But what struck me was not the engineering. It was the fact that she had spent 10 days thinking carefully about how my body worked, and what I needed, and how to give it to me. That is what Calder's Reach had become. A place where people thought about each other that way. So when the hegemony compliance delegation arrived, we already knew what we were going to lose. They were polite. They are always polite, the hegemony. They had a tall, gray-suited official who spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and he laid out the terms with the efficiency of a man who has delivered the same message to many worlds and has never once been told no. Calder's Reach would join the hegemony as a tributary colony. The humans would retain limited governance under hegemony oversight, and the Duskari, legally reclassified, legally without standing, would be transferred to hegemony labor administration. He said this last part the way you might mention a footnote. The Colonial Council met for 6 hours. I was not in the room, but I felt the meeting through the memory chain. Duskari council members pressing hands with others, passing impressions, keeping the whole community informed in real time. I felt the weight of the discussion, the fear, the anger, the careful, quiet arithmetic of people trying to measure what they could actually survive. And then I felt the moment when Priya Sanjukta, who had no official role and no vote, raised her hand from her seat at the back of the room where she had been allowed to observe, and said in a clear and completely certain voice, "These are our neighbors. The answer is no." The council voted 31-2 to refuse. The hegemony sent a fleet. I will not pretend that the days between the refusal and the fleet's arrival were calm ones. They were not. There was fear, real, honest fear. And there were long nights and hard conversations and moments where even the most confident voices went quiet. But here is what I also saw. I saw 2 million humans and 340,000 Daskari decide, together and without being told, that they were not going to wait to be saved by someone else. The humans built things. That is always what they do under pressure. They build. Engineers worked beside farmers. Teenagers who had grown up learning Daskari tunnel techniques now put that knowledge to military use, carving defensive passages through the lowland shelf with a speed and precision that even our elders found impressive. Old Bren Okafor, who had been quietly elected to head the defense coordination, moved through it all like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, eating enormous meals at irregular hours and making decisions with the calm certainty of someone who had committed fully to a course and found a kind of peace in it. I became the relay. That was my role, and I understood it without needing to be told. The Daskari memory chain, our biological ability to share impressions instantly through physical contact, made us something the hegemony had no counter for. I sat in the command bunker at the center of Vel'Kareth with my hands connected to a chain of Daskari scouts spread across the entire theater of operations, and I felt everything they felt in real time. A hegemony squad moving through the eastern corridor, a supply point going quiet, a position holding under pressure. All of it came to me in a continuous flow of shared sensation, and I passed it through Priya's translation headset to the human commanders who made the decisions. We were not their communications network. We were their nervous system. The hegemony landed ground forces expecting a population that would scatter under professional military pressure. What they found instead was an environment that seemed to resist them at every level. The tunnels they advanced through ended in collapsed sections. The routes their maps showed were blocked by flooding that our farmers had redirected deliberately. Their command signals were clean, but their commanders could not understand how we always seemed to know where they were going before they got there. In the eastern district, near the original walls of Vel'Kareth, the fighting became very close and very serious. The hegemony pushed hard for that ground, and I understood why. If they took Vel'Kareth, they took our memory halls. They took our elders, our archives, the shared record of everything we had ever been. A human commander turned to me, not because I outranked anyone, not because I had a military title or strategic authority, but because Vel'Kareth was my people's home, and this was a decision that should belong to us. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I reached into the memory chain. I felt 40,000 Daskari pressing close, not speaking, not directing, just present, just there. And beneath them, woven through everything, were 22 years of a life I had not expected to have. The cool, dim air of the lowland shelf. The sound of human children laughing in tunnels they had learned to love. Haruki Mano's puzzled expression when asked what we owed. Priya's hands, careful and certain, rebuilding a weapon for hands like mine. The universe had told us there was no place for us. These people had looked at that and, without making a great speech or a dramatic announcement, had simply proved it wrong. "We hold," I said. "We hold everything." And we did. What broke the hegemony's calculation, in the end, was not a single battle. It was the math of what this was costing them. They had come expecting a display of force to be enough. They had not prepared for a colony that would not stay frightened. They had not prepared for tunnel fighters who knew every passage of this ground, because they had built it with their own hands. They had not prepared for a nervous system that could not be jammed because it did not use signals. And they had not prepared, at all, for the ships. 3 neighboring human colonies in the fringe had been watching. They had no alliance document. They had no formal military agreement. They had simply watched what was happening to a place they considered a neighbor, and made, independently, the same decision that Bren Okafor had made 22 years ago, when she saw our dying ships in the dark. The ships they sent were not warships. They were freighters and supply vessels with weapons added on in the same improvised, functional style that characterized everything humans built in the fringe. No hegemony admiral would have been afraid of them on paper, but they changed the arithmetic. What had been a manageable cost became an unpredictable one, and the hegemony, above all things, did not like unpredictable costs. The new compliance delegate opened a channel. He was younger than the first one, and he did not sound quite as certain. "We are prepared to negotiate terms." Bren Okafor did not let him finish. "The Daskari are citizens of Calder's Reach," she said. "That is not a point we are negotiating. That is where we start. If you want to have a different conversation, we are here. If not, close the channel." The hegemony fleet withdrew. Not permanently. We all knew that. The hegemony does not forget, and it does not give up on things it has decided it wants. There would be more delegations, more pressure, more careful and polite expressions of inevitability. This was not an ending. But it was something. It was proof of something that I had felt for 22 years but never quite found the words for. The sun came up slowly over Calder's Reach the morning after the fighting stopped. 3 moons meant the light arrived in complicated stages, 1 layer at a time, and the lowland shelf caught it last, still wrapped in its familiar mist. I should have gone inside. My eyes, built for dim spaces, are not well suited to open dawn light. I did not go inside. I stood at the eastern wall of Vel'Karath, where the stone was still warm from the night's work, and I watched the light come. Priya stood beside me. She was covered in grease and had clearly not slept, and was eating something from a container she did not offer to share, which I had come to understand was a sign of deep exhaustion in humans. She held out a small device. It was new. I had not seen it before. Small and round, with a contact surface on one side. A memory translator, she said. Rough, probably not very accurate, but it works both ways. She paused. I want to know what Veth Sora's sunrise looked like, if you want to share it. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I pressed my palm to her hand and gave her what my mother had given me. The green light, the silver grass, the cold and the weight of a beauty that meant more after it was lost. I felt her receive it, imperfectly, the way a reflection in water is not quite a mirror, but real enough. Then she did something I had not expected. She shared something back. It came through the device in a loose, warm rush. Not a Daskari memory, not precise or complete, but unmistakably real. The night she heard that Vel'Karath was in danger. The moment she walked to her garage, not because anyone asked her to, but because her hands needed something to do, and her mind would not let her rest until she had done it. The particular feeling of working on a problem in the dark, alone, when the outcome is not certain but the effort is the only thing that feels honest. She had rebuilt my rifle because it was the shape that her caring took that night. I had spent 22 years wondering why the humans of Calder's Reach had done what they did. I had asked Haruki Mano once, directly, expecting an answer full of strategy or principle or at least a well-constructed reason. He had shrugged and said, "You needed a place. We had one." Standing there in the misty lowland dawn with Priya's memory still settling into me like warmth after a long cold, I finally understood that this was not a simple answer. It was a complete one. The humans of Calder's Reach had not helped us because of a philosophy. They had not helped us because of a law or a treaty or a careful political calculation. They had helped us because someone looked out at the dark and saw people who needed something, and the gap between seeing that and doing something about it was, for them, almost no gap at all. The universe had looked at my people and found us inconvenient. These people had looked at us and found us worth knowing. I thought about what the hegemony delegate had said, in his polished and immovable certainty. I thought about the committees and the forms and the long documents full of careful words for a simple thing. I thought about the legal reclassification, the 3 choices that were not really choices. And then I thought about Bren Okafor's voice on an open channel, unhurried and warm, offering food and a dock to strangers in the dark. The universe had decided there was no place for my kind. The universe, it turned out, had not asked Calder's Reach. I pressed my hand against the warm stone of the wall we had held together. I felt the city beneath me, the tunnels and chambers and memory halls, the deep roots of a life I had not expected to be given. 40,000 Daskari, still present in the chain. 2 million humans, already starting to rebuild what the fight had cost. And one girl beside me, tired and grease-stained and entirely satisfied with the night's work, watching the same sunrise I was watching. The cosmos had cast us aside. But there are places in the dark where people decide that is not the final word. Where someone sees a problem and picks up the nearest tool and gets to work, not because they were told to, not because there is a reward waiting at the end, but because the work is there, and their hands are capable, and the alternative is to do nothing, and doing nothing is simply not something they are built for. I have been here for 22 years. I have watched these people hold ground that no rational calculation said they could hold. I have watched them build things that should have taken decades and months, because the need was real and the hours were available and resting never quite felt right when something still needed doing. I have watched them welcome strangers, rebuild weapons for hands they had never held before, and stand in front of fleets with repurposed freighters, and the absolute refusal to accept a story that ends badly. I do not know everything about humans. I learn something new about them regularly, and it is rarely what I expected. But I know this much. If the universe ever comes for us again, and it will find us exactly where we are. In our tunnels, in our halls, in our workshops, in our bunkers, side by side with the people who made room for us when the rest of the galaxy said there was none. And it will find us ready. Because this is our home now. And we know what it is worth defending.